Hi, Minnesota. This is Christie Thompson with Christie Legal, divorce and child custody paralegal and mediator. And it's time for the weekly conversation about divorce, and it's more than the law. And today I am joined by Dr. Asia King, and she will tell you more about herself, but I'm really excited because you really need to know what she has to say. So let's talk a little bit about the legalities of divorce. The first thing that you do when you divorce is divide the assets. You are going to place a value on the assets. Then we are going to create a marital assets spreadsheet. And then we are going to move the assets around like puzzle pieces to make sure that each of you walks away with half of the marital assets. Of course, this is unless you folks agree to some other division. A marital asset is something that was purchased or accrued during the marriage. So that would not include, income assets that you came into the marriage with, including money in your financial accounts. Now, there is an exception to the house, and there is a formula. If you buy a house before the marriage, and there's a formula for that. We can get into that on a consultation. Another asset that is not a marital asset is an asset that was inherited or gifted. So if your parents gave you a $20,000 down payment on your home, then that $20,000 of the equity in the home would not be a marital asset. So after we divide the assets, which could be a simple thing, or we could mediate about it for 10 hours. Either way, after we figure that out, then we're going to move on to dividing the debts. And all debts that are incurred during the marriage are marital debts. So if you are in a marriage that is past the point of no return, one of the reasons to get divorced as soon as possible is that you are going to have fewer debts to divide the sooner that you get divorced. That includes student loans, that includes medical bills, credit card debt, bank debt, everything. And if you folks have children, then there are all sorts of things to handle about the children. The parenting time schedule, just the regular basic, where's the child going to be Monday through Friday? There's holidays, there's vacations. And I am going to ask my clients to reach agreements on things that I know are going to be a problem moving forward. Lots of, co-parenting agreements that will not only prevent problems, but just make co-parenting more easy. It might be hard topics to talk about, but believe me, you want to make decisions about those things now while you're being slightly more cooperative than later on when you might be less cooperative. We'll talk about child support and excuse me, and medical and dental insurance as well. And something you folks might or might not know is that one of the spouses could actually stay on the medical and dental insurance of the other spouse after the divorce because of the federal COBRA law. And there are details to that. One detail to know is that when you are no longer married to the other person, the cost of the insurance is going to like triple. So it might not be a good choice, but you do have that opportunity. So if you have a lot of medical bills and your employer doesn't offer health insurance, then that would be an awesome choice. Or you're self-employed, that would be an awesome choice. So that is enough about legal stuff, and I am not seeing any questions in Messenger or text. And in the chat. So nobody has any questions right now. Feel free to send me any questions. Because, after Dr. Asia talks and, then we're gonna be available to answer people's questions. And so I could answer a question then as well. So let's have Dr. Asia King take it away. And she has information that you guys are going to benefit from as well. Thank you, Dr. King.
No problem. Thank you for having me, Christy. Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Asia King, counseling psychologist, licensed here in the state of Minnesota, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Ohio. And I provide uh, mental health services to high functioning professionals who are dealing with workplace bullying, burnout, loneliness, and anything in between that comes within their life. And this is important because as professionals, we're not just dealing with work issues, we're dealing with life issues. And divorce, separation, is definitely a life issue that can interfere with our work performances, how we think about our careers, and just even financially. As Christy was saying, when you go through a divorce, there are all sorts of considerations that happen with assets and finances and 401ks and, insurances. And so there's a lot that can be at stake when it comes to a divorce. So I encourage a lot of times, if you're thinking about marrying, maybe you're single and you're listening to this, or maybe you're thinking about getting remarried in the future, look deep before you leap. So if that's a possibility, definitely do so. But one thing that Christy brought up is payments for the family, like the separation of assets. One thing that I encourage people who are going through a divorce is, especially if there are children involved, be mindful of the resentment, anger that happens when you are working through asset separation and distribution. I've seen couples that get into really tight tiffs about what they're willing to give, not give, help with, not help with. And especially if you have children, you want to make sure that you are keeping a flow that is healthy for the children, not creating an unnecessary disruption in their lives because you're trying to get it all or you're trying to withhold. Mediation is so important. Yes, maybe you built something together. Yes, maybe you had something before you got married and then, your spouse now has asset to that. Try to be as fair as possible. Try to think about what is the ultimate goal. If the ultimate goal is to hurt the other person, you're moving in the wrong direction. If your decisions are based out of anger, resentment, and hate, you're moving in the wrong direction. And I understand, and I hear that, maybe this divorce was out of severity, or, maybe there's infidelity, maybe there was abuse, maybe there were, really, really, really hard things that you went through. That is for a separate situation and case and dealings with. When it comes to the finances, we want to make sure that our children, as best as possible, don't feel the impact of the separation. I mean, it's going to be there for sure because they know, my parents are no longer together. But when it comes to things like paying for childcare or paying for a child's extracurricular activities or insurance or medical bills, we want to make sure that still goes, that still happens, because the child has no no say so in this. And you'd be surprised. And maybe you just think for yourselves, but I get adults who still remember the outcome of a divorce. You think your kids aren't listening, but they are in the next bedroom. They are watching TV while ear hustling what's happening. And so we want to make sure that, as best as possible, to make sure that the flow of their life, the comfort of their life, the support of their life is available. Okay. If there is an opportunity to step up beyond what you're ordered, do so. You know, I remember my mom said one time, my dad was paying child support or whatnot. They had divorced, and I was taking karate classes. And she asked my dad for, she was like, the classes were like $80. And my dad was well to do, had plenty of money, da 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 da. And she asked him for the $80 a month for the karate classes. And he was just like, very spitefully, like, no, I ain't giving you nothing else. So she took him back to court. And not only did they give her what she asked for, but they doubled. They doubled what he had to pay. And her thing was, if you had just worked with me, I would have worked with you. So save yourself some heartache and some unnecessary court time by stepping up if you're able to. If the finances aren't there, okay. But if you're able to pitch in a little bit more, the court order is just the court order. But if there's a little bit here and there that you can offer, do so. Making sure that we are not moving out of spite, anger, and bitterness. And if that's hard, which I can understand it is, get support. Come to therapy. Join a divorce group. Talk to others. But don't let your anger, resentment, hate, and hurt devour you to the point where it's disrupting the lives of your children. So that's my advice for today. What do you got, Christy? No, I said a lot.
Yeah, and there's just so much that I want to follow up on.
Yeah.
And I hear that your overarching theme is, don't let the anger or sadness or other negative feelings that you are feeling because of the divorce or separation determine your behavior during
Mm-hmm.
the divorce process and after the divorce process, because that harms your children.
Mm-hmm.
And and that is exactly um what I try to help people do when they're mediating. Um
Mm-hmm.
because people are self-centered when they're unhappy, right? And so I try to bring them back to pull them out of their self-centeredness. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and people naturally, get it. Like, okay, we got to do what's in the best interest of the children, because we want them to be happy and well-adjusted people. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but the ones who don't, I am constantly trying to reel them in. And I even use the legal phrase, best interest of the children, let's talk about what's in the best interest of the children, and in other words, stop swearing and stop being so petty. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and and like you cannot emphasize this point enough, that you have to act in the best interest of the children. Your children are going to remember this for the rest of their lives. I have met people who are grown-ass adults, and they're like, I don't have a relationship with my mom because she kept me from my dad. Or I don't have a relationship with my dad because he didn't pay child support. Or
Mm-hmm.
or I don't have a relationship with my mom or dad because, they tried to put my mom or dad through the ringer. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, your children are people, and they are going to remember all of this. Um,
Absolutely.
so
Absolutely.
I was
Because
cheering
they're
when you were saying that stuff.
because they're watching. You know, we think our children aren't watching, but they are absolutely watching. And this is their first line of learning of how to navigate difficult relationships, you know. So if you are showing up to the house cussing, the other parent out, if you're calling on the phone or sending very berating text messages and emails, there's only so much the other parent can hide, you know, evil, anger, irritation, whatever, it seeps out. And so children eventually pick up on that, and so and I don't want to negate that there is, everybody has their reason for divorcing, but no matter what the reason is, you want to make sure that you are keeping your feelings in check and as best as possible. I mean, there's no perfection to this. It's gonna seep out. It is. And the children are gonna kind of feel it to a degree, but what you want to be able to show them is that you can have conflict with people without it becoming vile, without it becoming toxic. This isn't about hiding emotions, because divorce, separation of any kind, is very sad, especially if this isn't what the other spouse is looking for, you know. So it can produce emotions, and we're not trying to hide emotions from children because they're going to go through it themselves. But what we are trying to model is that when we do go through these hardships, how do you handle it? And if they're seeing, the parents fighting and calling each other names and withholding visitations and asking more than what is necessary because you're angry, that teaches them this is how we handle conflict. We get revenge, we call names, we withhold, we continue the mind games. And so we want to step out of that. We want to step out of that. We want to make sure that we're not perpetuating a cycle of unhealthy adults because of our behavior and how we're modeling it.
Oh my gosh. Like, you just hit the head on the nail about one of the mental health needs that how you handle this divorce or separation is going to come in play for your children, the best interests of your children. And that is, you are teaching them how to handle relationships. And they're going to take that with them the rest of their lives. And if it's, if you're not teaching them the right things until they go to a lot of counseling, they're going to repeat these negative behaviors. And
Mhm.
then they're going to destroy other people's lives. And
Yeah,
they're not going to have a good relationship. So they're going to destroy their own life too.
yeah,
Because the two most important decisions that you will ever make are who you have a child with and who you partner with romantically, because those people affect every part of your life.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so if
yeah,
you're continually damaging other people because they're damaged, and they're bleeding all over everybody else, um, then yes, that your parents are your first educators. And there's just so many relationship problems now because of how people were raised. And being a single woman, I've experienced a lot of them. So yes, how you handle this divorce or child custody case now is not only going to affect you for the rest of your life, financially, and emotionally, but it's going to affect your kids for the rest of their lives, emotionally and financially too.
yeah,
And it's
yeah,
just, and that was a really nice point too, that about, sometimes do more, because um I actually have had male clients um who paid more than the court ordered child support because They were concerned about their children. And
Mhm.
I was like, you are a great dad. I just
Mhm.
came out and said it. You are really putting the best interests of your children first.
Mhm. 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 And unless you prove that harm is being done with the money,
Right.
don't be afraid to provide support. Don't be afraid to add, add more. And I've heard people say, you know, this money is for the child, like only spend it on the child. So like clothes and food for the, no, lights are for the child. Mortgage is for the child. Gas is for the child. Anything that helps the system to go is for the child. So don't get caught up in it has to be anything that is meant to keep the house going and life going, it counts towards the child. Because I've had some people who are like, no, paying your lights or doing this for yourself doesn't help the child. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. A healthy parent is the best supported parent for the child. You don't get to dictate how the money is spent unless you know that it's spent in a way that is harming. I mean, drugs, alcohol, you know, partying or whatnot, and things are still not being supported, then, that's a different situation. But if things are still going and the child is healthy, happy, getting their needs met, you don't get to dictate how the money is being spent. So try to let go of the who, what,
Mm.
when, how as much as possible when it comes to where your support is going. But I say ultimately, make sure that you are allowing your decisions to be based on what's best for the child. Oh, you're on mute, Kristen.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that sometimes the person who's paying the child support doesn't think about the big picture that, like the mom, isn't getting a one-bedroom apartment because they're the children. And so, rent now, like, unless you're in a very bad part of, the Twin Cities, or way out in rural Minnesota, is $1,700, for like a one bedroom. There's a couple of two bedrooms for 1,700, and so housing's very expensive. The cost of food has gone up so much. Gas,
Gas,
gas.
daycare.
Oh, daycare is so much more expensive than when my kids were young.
Yeah,
Holy cow. And
yeah,
so it's just like, you know, all that stuff adds up, and um they're just, I don't know if they're thinking about it, all this stuff.
right, right. And that's why I just have to go back into, you know, look at it from your logical mind versus your heart mind, your emotional mind. They left me, they hurt me, they lied to me, I'm not paying them shit. Like, you know, because that's usually the conversation. I have a few couples that try to separate, or what they call decoupling, or um uh moving forward without each other type therapy, healthy decoupling. And this isn't for everybody, because sometimes you're decoupling because they are narcissistic, they are an abuser, right? So I'm not saying try to be in any space with anyone that has harmed you and you're escaping. But for those who are able to, look into decoupling services, where, we this does hurt for both of us, but we want to figure this out in an amicable way. So there are decoupling services out there that help the couple to figure out what does it look like to have life together without each other. Because, if you share a child, you're in each other's life forever. Not necessarily as friends, but if any, yeah, I mean, not necessarily as friends, but if anything were to happen to that child, you should want to tell the other spouse, like, hey, Tim is in the hospital. Hey, Tim is struggling over here. So those conversations still have to occur if it's safe. So if you're able to, and you two, are just really struggling, but there's an openness, even a slight openness to figure out how to move forward through support and services, absolutely go for it. But if you're not, then, keep your boundaries. Keep your boundaries, make sure that you are, set on what you will and won't do. And I think another conversation needs to be had about specifically how to separate and divorce a narcissist.
Whoa, yeah. We could
Yeah.
do, you know what? We should do another one all about that.
That's what I'm saying. That conversation needs its own space because, like I said, if you're separating from your partner because of harmful and abusive behavior, all this other stuff, I mean, definitely make sure that you're still divorcing from a place of no harm, but you're doing the repair on yourself if you're coming from an abusive relationship. So there's a lot to navigate around that. So I definitely say we need to have a whole maybe series around how to maneuver through a narcissistic divorce.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, like, the advice in general to be as fair as possible is when things are pretty normal.
When things are normal, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so that's the space that I'm speaking from. When you are both have a reasonable mindset of like trying to move forward in a peaceful manner, and there are couples who are like that. But if it is from a space of getting away from chaos and insanity and abuse and narcissism, that takes a whole nother tactic. So I don't want anybody to try to figure out how to make amends with their narcissist. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. You need a whole different track on how to separate from that.
Yeah. Glad we clarified that. I didn't even think about it for a bit there.
Yeah.
So Dr. Asia, can you tell us what are the negative psychological effects on kids when their parents divorce or separate in a highly conflictual manner?
That's a great question. It can definitely show up in so many facets. The child can become fearful. The child can become anxious, overwhelmed, um, definitely develop various attachment styles, whether avoidant to protect themselves, anxious to cling on, a combination of both, mixture of both, come and go, come and go. So, the child that is going through a divorce, because it's not just the adults, the child is going through a divorce too. And so there comes this point of, just wondering what does the family unit look like now? Because there are so many changes that occur. Just speaking from experience, when my parents divorced, um, I remember we were living in Germany and I was maybe around 5 or so. And I remember my mom being downstairs, like packing or getting things together in the storage unit. And my dad came home. Now, mind you, I can remember this when I was 5 years old. This is a very vivid memory for me. And my dad came home and I remember him saying, "Where's your mom?" And I said, "She's downstairs packing because we're leaving." And he picked me up and I said, "Are you coming with us?" And he said, "No, baby, I'm not." And I remember feeling confused, like, you're not coming with us? And even to this day, like, they haven't been married since I was 5 or 6 years old, but it's still that little girl in me still tears up because you're not going to be here. We're not going to be with you. We're moving forward without you. Then we moved from Germany and I moved to Birmingham to live with my grandma. And my dad's not there, but I remember getting calls and he would come and pick us up during summertime. And we drive from, he drive from Minnesota to Birmingham and we drive back. And so my dad has always been present, but it wasn't in the same respect of what I was kind of used to. But I also remember when they were married, there was a lot of fighting. I remember feeling scared. I remember feeling nervous, like I was going to be in trouble. Um, I remember just my mom being angry and my dad being distant. And so I'm well in my 40s and I still remember that. I tell my clients often, we're never too far from our childhood. We just get older, but that kid still lives in us. And so I'm not, I never regretted them divorcing because it was very volatile. But that part of me still kind of thinks, what if I did have a two-parent household? Would I have struggled with the relationships that I've had today? Would I have, you have so many questions that you have as a like, what if this hadn't happened? But then you got to do your personal work because it's something that you can't change. You don't get back, but you can change for yourself in the future. And even though I did end up divorced myself, that's why I took me and my ex-husband to post-divorce therapy because I had to figure out like what cycle did I perpetuate that my parents perpetuated that I want to prevent from my own kids. So, it the psychological piece that happens with our children is very complex. It's very integrated. Um, and it has so many pieces to it. And once again, I would never advocate for somebody to stay in a marriage just so you can have a two-parent household. Absolutely not. I think my mom made the best decision to leave my father. I love my father, but I also know that had she stayed, I probably would have had more harm than good. So I don't wish for her to have stayed in that just to have had a two-parent household. Now, what I will say is if you are separating and decoupling, get your kids into therapy. That's the one thing that my mom didn't do, but this is the late 80s. This is the late 80s, early 90s. Therapy, mental health at that capacity wasn't like it is today. There was no social media. I'm sure there were therapists, but the accessibility to therapy in Birmingham, Alabama, 1990, like I don't know. Nobody's having that conversation because the therapy was being in healthy family. Like I had the best childhood with my grandma and watching her bake apple pies from scratch because she lived to be 100. So my therapy was being in family rooted Southern, and that was what wrapped around me. But we're in a new age and time where mental health is accessible more than ever. The awareness and the wording and everything is out there more than ever. So I think at this point, there really aren't any excuses to not get your children's support. Now, unless there's an accessibility piece, because I understand some rural communities may not have access to, but virtual is offered to everybody. People offer low scale sliding scale fees if you can't afford the rate or your insurance is kind of, you know, whatever. Um, it's there. It's there. And even if you can't do the therapy, there are great resources out there that you can naturally tap into. I'm sure free support groups, articles, videos. YouTube has a plethora of experts that give good and solid advice on what to do until you can bridge that gap. The difference from my mom, 1990, and today is my mom, one no internet, one no, there was not that plethora of access to wellness for me. We don't have that. That's not the same story today. There is a wide range of healthy support until you can get the main support, which is therapy.
Girl, you are so right that, I grew up in a high conflict home, and my parents did not divorce, and
Mm,
and it was damaging. It was quite damaging. And so thank you so much for saying that don't stay for the children. Like it was very damaging to myself and my siblings.
mm,
And that is why I love my work. And also your point about how there were not resources back in the 90s, when we were both kids, or I'm older than you, so I was an older kid. So really, this is happening to me in the 70s and 80s, but there weren't resources in the 90s either. Um,
mhm,
as a matter of fact, it wasn't until the 1990s that when there was domestic abuse, that the government did not, make it up to the abused party, who was usually the woman, did not leave it up to the abused party as to whether or not the government is going to charge the abuser with domestic abuse. So it's like, and if you can't, get help with getting out of domestic abuse, how are you going to leave? And, so many great things have happened since the 90s.
mm,
Um, that, yeah, you can get help all over the place. After I had a very significant relationship end last year, I became like a Instagram, YouTube, like junkie about relationships. Um, and I have also gone to counseling, um, not for the relationship stuff, but for childhood stuff, counseling. And we could talk forever. And so I want to leave everybody with what Dr. Asia said, because the best way to not have a problem is to prevent it. Like Benjamin Franklin said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
mm.
And so Dr. Asia said real early on in this conversation, look deep before you leap. So before you have a child with somebody, before you get married or, partner long term, go to premarital counseling. Really get to know the person, because people, especially those people, narcissists who are not dealing with today, boy, they can really hide things.
Mm.
Um, or people with other mental health disorders also can really hide things. So look deep before you leap. And I'm so going to use that. And I thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Asia. Do you
Thank
have any
you.
final thoughts?
Um, you know, for those, if anybody is married and you're listening this on a humbug, or you're thinking about divorce and you're listening to this, get counsel. Get counsel. Okay. Go to your own therapy and start talking it through. Get validation and understanding what you're experiencing. Because yes, look deep before you leap. And sometimes people can definitely look deep and things can be great for a couple of years, but as things always do, people change, right? People change. And so understanding what these changes are doing and how they're occurring are important, but ultimately make sure that you're putting the children first because they are watching, they are listening, they are hearing, they are understanding, they are absorbing energy and auras. They they hear all, they see all, they know all. So you're not hiding anything. Okay? Having real honest, not adult themed conversations, but age appropriate conversations as to what's going on are helpful. And most importantly, use the resources that you have that are accessible to you to help the children and yourself navigate these changes because they do matter and they impact everybody, but they don't have to be bad.
Thank you so much. As usual, you give us so much to think about. And y'all, reach out to Dr. Asia if you need help. For real. And so if you guys want a free consultation from either of us, our contact information will be in the post shortly. You can also Google us, Dr. Asia King, Christie Legal. We want to help you have the most positive as possible divorce or separation with or without children.
Mhm.
I hope that everyone in Minnesota has a great rest of this fairly warm day. Don't let it get the best of you. Don't let it increase your anger. And yes, um, it's very difficult at this time, but think about everyone who is involved. I hope everyone has a
Absolutely.
great rest of the day.
All right. Have a great day, y'all. Bye. Till next time.